From Arnold Schwarzenegger's brutal rise from competitive bodybuilding stages to Christian Bale's body pushed to dangerous extremes in the name of realism. One built muscle to escape poverty, the other destroyed and rebuilt his body to survive Hollywood expectations. These weren't transformations for vanity. They were sacrifices demanded by fame. His is what happens when acting crosses into bodybuilding. Arnold Schwarzenegger is the foundation of this entire topic, the only true professional bodybuilder who didn't just enter Hollywood, but reshaped it. Before action heroes were defined by muscle, Arnold forced the film industry to accept bodybuilding physiques as leading men. His journey began far from movie sets, rising from poverty in Austria to dominating the competitive bodybuilding world with 7 Mr. Olympia titles between 1970 and 1980. This wasn't aesthetic fitness. Arnold trained at a level indistinguishable from elite bodybuilding standards: high volume, hypertrophy, extreme caloric intake, brutal recovery demands, and relentless progression. His physique wasn't built for a role. It created roles that didn't exist before. Hollywood didn't ask Arnold to get bigger. It adjusted its expectations around his size. What makes Arnold unique in this discussion is that he didn't temporarily adopt bodybuilding methods. He lived inside that world first, then carried its culture directly into film. Movies like Conan the Barbarian and The Terminator didn't merely feature muscle, they were constructed around it. His body became narrative power, authority, and intimidation. Arnold also normalized a dangerous idea that followed for decades, that physical dominance equals star power. After him, actors weren't just judged on performance, but on mass, definition, and visual impact. Studios began demanding bodies that resembled competitive physiques, even when genetics, age, or long-term health didn't support it. Arnold didn't just become a Hollywood star who trained like a bodybuilder. He became the blueprint that forced Hollywood to chase bodybuilding itself. Sylvester Stallone represents a different path into bodybuilding culture. Not dominance first, but survival through physical reinvention. Unlike Arnold Schwarzenegger, Stallone did not arrive in Hollywood with a championship physique. He built his body out of necessity, using muscle as a tool to stay relevant in an industry that repeatedly tried to discard him. Stallone's transformation began with Rocky in 1976, where his physique reflected grit rather than size. But as Hollywood evolved, so did the demands placed on him. By the time Rambo: First Blood Part 2 and Rocky III arrived in the 1980s, Stallone had fully embraced bodybuilding discipline, high-volume hypertrophy training, extreme leanness, and aggressive cutting cycles that mirrored competitive standards of the era. What separates Stallone from typical actor fitness is longevity. Decade after decade, he rebuilt his body to meet escalating expectations. As action heroes grew larger and more defined, Stallone responded by pushing his physique further, often well into middle age. Films like Rambo, 2008, and The Expendables showcased a body shaped not by short-term prep, but by years of consistent bodybuilding-style training. Stallone openly admitted to experimenting with performance-enhancing drugs during earlier eras, reflecting a time when Hollywood quietly borrowed from bodybuilding's pharmacological culture to meet visual demands. His extreme conditioning came with real costs, including injuries, surgeries, and long recovery periods that mirrored those seen in competitive athletes. Stallone's story illustrates a key theme of this topic. Hollywood doesn't just reward muscle, it punishes decline. To remain viable, he repeatedly reshaped his body beyond what age, health, or comfort would normally allow. He didn't become a bodybuilder to stand on a stage. He became one to survive Hollywood's unforgiving expectations. Dwayne Johnson represents the moment when professional mass culture fully merged with Hollywood. Unlike Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone, Johnson did not discover bodybuilding to break into film. He arrived already forged by years of extreme physical demand in professional wrestling. By the time Hollywood noticed him, his body was not a project. It was a finished weapon. Johnson's foundation was built in the WWE, where size, durability, and visual dominance were non-negotiable. Wrestling required constant hypertrophy training, heavy compound lifts, brutal travel schedules, and recovery under injury. When he transitioned into acting in the early 2000s, Hollywood did not ask him to slim down or soften his physique. Instead, it adjusted to him. His mass became his calling card. What makes Johnson central to this topic is consistency at scale. While many actors bulk temporarily for roles, Johnson maintains bodybuilding-level volume year-round. His training reflects classic hypertrophy principles: high frequency, heavy loads, isolation work layered on compound lifts, and extreme caloric intake to sustain size. This is not movie prep. It is long-term mass maintenance at a level few bodies can tolerate. As his career expanded into global franchises, the pressure intensified. Each role demanded the same or greater size, reinforcing a cycle where downsizing was no longer an option. Muscle became brand identity. His body was no longer just personal, it was commercial infrastructure supporting billion-dollar films. Johnson has spoken openly about discipline, routine, and mental control, but his physique also reflects the silent expectations Hollywood inherited from bodybuilding culture. Bigger reads as stronger, stronger reads as bankable. Dwayne Johnson did not temporarily become a bodybuilder for Hollywood. He represents Hollywood's full acceptance of permanent mass as star power. Hugh Jackman's transformation into bodybuilding culture represents endurance under escalation. Unlike actors who bulk briefly for a single role, Jackman was trapped inside a cycle that repeated and intensified for nearly 2 decades. What began as preparation for X-Men in 2000 evolved into one of Hollywood's longest-running physical demands. Early versions of Wolverine required athletic leanness more than mass. But as superhero films grew larger and audiences demanded visual escalation, so did the pressure on Jackman's body. With each sequel, Wolverine had to appear bigger, leaner, and more imposing. To meet those expectations, Jackman adopted classic bodybuilding methods: hypertrophy-focused splits, progressive overload, long bulking phases followed by extreme cutting, and dehydration protocols approaching competitive standards. What separates Jackman from typical actor fitness is age and duration. By his 40s and 50s, when most actors reduce physical strain, Jackman pushed harder. Roles like The Wolverine, 2013, and Logan, 2017, required visible density, striations, and vascularity rarely demanded of actors at that age. Achieving this meant maintaining high training volume while managing declining recovery capacity, a challenge familiar to competitive bodybuilders. Jackman has openly discussed the mental and physical toll of repeated bulking and cutting cycles, including exhaustion, hormonal stress, and the psychological pressure of maintaining a Wolverine-ready body. These weren't transformations driven by vanity, but by expectation. Once audiences associated the character with extreme conditioning, anything less became unacceptable. Jackman did not enter bodybuilding culture seeking size. He was pulled into it by a role that refused to evolve with his body. Chris Hemsworth's entry into bodybuilding culture was not accidental. It was engineered by blockbuster escalation when he was first cast as Thor in Thor, 2011. The role required a powerful but manageable physique. At that point, Hemsworth was athletic and broad, but not yet operating at true bodybuilding mass. That changed quickly. By the Avengers, 2012, Thor was no longer just a character. He was a visual benchmark. Hemsworth was expected to stand shoulder to shoulder with other superheroes and still read as the physically dominant god. To achieve that, he adopted classic bodybuilding bulking protocols: long caloric surpluses, heavy compound lifts, and high-volume isolation work to exaggerate shoulders, chest, and arms. The escalation peaked in Avengers, Age of Ultron, 2015, and Thor, Ragnarok, 2017. Each sequel demanded a bigger upper body, fuller delts, thicker arms, and deeper separation on camera. This wasn't temporary prep. Hemsworth had to maintain mass across years, filming schedules, and reshoots, a requirement far closer to competitive bodybuilding than actor fitness. By Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame, 2018-2019, the expectation was locked in. Thor's size had become part of the Marvel visual language. Downsizing wasn't an option. Maintaining that look required repeated bulk and cut cycles, aggressive fat loss before filming, and joint-heavy training that took a cumulative toll. Hemsworth has openly discussed the strain, physical fatigue, joint stress, and mental burnout from sustaining Thor's body for nearly a decade. The role didn't just transform his physique, it locked him into bodybuilding discipline as a career requirement. Thor didn't make Hemsworth muscular once. It forced him to live inside bodybuilding culture for years to stay believable on screen. Henry Cavill's transformation into bodybuilding culture was driven by a series of roles that demanded visible, believable power, not just athletic fitness. The shift began with Man of Steel, 2013, where Cavill wasn't simply asked to look muscular. He was expected to embody a being capable of tearing through steel and concrete. Superman's body had to read as structurally unstoppable, even when standing still. That expectation intensified in Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, 2016. The infamous training montage, heavy tire flips, chain sled pulls, explosive presses, wasn't marketing fiction. Cavill had to maintain dense mass, wide shoulders, and thick arms to sell Superman as physically dominant next to Ben Affleck's Batman. This required true bodybuilding-style hypertrophy, built on heavy compound lifts and progressive overload, followed by aggressive cutting phases to maintain visual sharpness under studio lighting. By Justice League 2017, the standard was locked in. Cavill couldn't downsize between films. His physique had become part of the character's identity. Maintaining that look meant year-round caloric management, isolation work to exaggerate shape, and dehydration protocols for shirtless scenes, a process that mirrored contest prep more than actor fitness. Even outside the DC universe, roles like The Witcher 2019 to 2023 reinforced the demand. Geralt's physical presence required thick back musculature, capped delts, and forearms that suggested years of combat. Sword work alone wasn't enough. The body had to look forged, not trained. Henry Cavill didn't become muscular for a single role. He was locked into a cycle where every character demanded bodybuilding discipline to remain believable. Dave Bautista represents the rare case where bodybuilding mass entered Hollywood fully formed and never left. Unlike actors who had to build size for a role, Bautista arrived with a physique already shaped by years of extreme training, discipline, and physical punishment in professional wrestling. His body wasn't a transformation project. It was the starting point. Bautista's Hollywood breakthrough came with Guardians of the Galaxy 2014. Drax the Destroyer required more than size. He needed density, thickness, and a frame that looked carved from stone. Bautista's massive chest, capped delts, and thick arms weren't enhanced for the role. They were simply maintained. What audiences saw on screen was the result of decades of bodybuilding-style training, not a temporary bulk. The demand continued through Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 2, 2017, and Avengers: Infinity War, 2018. While CGI handled the tattoos, the muscle underneath had to remain real. Bautista trained to preserve size while managing joint damage accumulated over years of wrestling and lifting. Maintaining that mass required heavy resistance training, strict nutrition, and careful recovery, a challenge closer to aging competitive bodybuilders than actors. Even when Bautista sought more dramatic roles, the physique followed him. Films like Blade Runner 2049, 2017, and Dune 2021 used his sheer physical presence as narrative weight. He didn't need to flex. His size communicated threat, authority, and inevitability. In later years, Bautista has openly discussed downsizing for health, acknowledging the toll extreme mass took on his body. But for much of his career, Hollywood didn't see an actor. It saw a body that couldn't be replaced. Dave Bautista didn't become a bodybuilder for Hollywood. Hollywood built roles around the bodybuilder he already was. John Cena's transition into Hollywood is a case study in permanent bodybuilding discipline carried across industries. Long before acting roles arrived, Cena had already built a physique through decades of hypertrophy-focused training, heavy compound lifting, and relentless volume in professional wrestling. When Hollywood cast him, it wasn't asking for a transformation. It was buying the body as part of the package. Cena's early film appearances, including The Marine 2006 and 12 Rounds 2009, leaned directly on his mass and conditioning. These roles required him to look physically dominant in motion, sprinting, fighting, and absorbing impact, without sacrificing size. That meant maintaining bodybuilding-level training while filming, not just prepping beforehand. His chest thickness, shoulder caps, and arm density weren't cinematic tricks. They were the result of year-round hypertrophy maintenance. As Cena's career expanded into comedies and ensemble action films like Trainwreck 2015, Bumblebee 2018, and The Suicide Squad 2021, the expectation didn't disappear. Even when humor replaced intimidation, his physique remained non-negotiable. Peacemaker, in particular, required visible mass, vascularity, and conditioning across long shooting schedules, a demand closer to contest readiness than casual fitness. What separates Cena from typical actor physiques is durability over decades. While many stars bulk and cut temporarily, Cena sustained elite size well into his 40s, managing joint stress, recovery, and calorie demands familiar to competitive bodybuilders. He has openly acknowledged adapting training to preserve longevity, but the core commitment to mass never left. John Cena didn't step into bodybuilding for a role. He carried bodybuilding into Hollywood and proved it could survive there long-term. Zac Efron's transformation is one of the clearest examples of Hollywood pushing an actor past fitness and into bodybuilding extremes. For most of his early career, Efron was known for a lean, youthful build, athletic but far from bodybuilding culture. That changed abruptly with Baywatch 2017, a role that demanded not just leanness, but contest-level conditioning under unforgiving camera angles. To meet those expectations, Efron underwent an aggressive regimen built around isolation-heavy hypertrophy, extreme cutting, and prolonged periods at very low body fat. His shoulders, chest, arms and abdominals were trained to exaggerate separation and vascularity rather than strength, a visual priority commonly seen in physique and bodybuilding prep. This wasn't about performance on screen. It was about looking perfect in still frames and slow-motion shots. What makes Efron's case especially important to this topic is what happened afterward. Unlike many actors, he openly discussed the physical and psychological cost of maintaining that look. Efron later revealed that staying at such low body fat disrupted his sleep, mood, and overall health, forcing him into cycles of overtraining, exhaustion, and disordered eating patterns. The physique audiences praised was unsustainable. Following Baywatch, Efron intentionally stepped away from extreme conditioning, shifting toward functional training and more moderate body composition. His experience exposed a reality often hidden in Hollywood, that bodybuilding-style conditioning, when imposed on actors without long-term adaptation or recovery windows, carries real consequences. Efron didn't chase bodybuilding for dominance or longevity. He was pushed into its most punishing aesthetic extreme and became one of the few to openly admit the cost. Jason Momoa represents a different branch of bodybuilding culture in Hollywood, raw density over polish. His physique was never built to look stage-ready or hyper-dry under lights. Instead, it was forged to communicate power, resilience, and physical intimidation on screen. From the start, Momoa's roles demanded a body that looked used, not perfected. The shift became unmistakable with Conan the Barbarian, 2011, where Momoa was required to carry thick muscle mass, wide shoulders, and a brutal presence that felt believable in combat. That expectation continued and intensified with Game of Thrones, 2011 to 2012. Khal Drogo didn't need shredded abs. He needed dense arms, a thick back, and the kind of mass that looked functional in violence. The body had to appear capable of killing, not posing. By the time Momoa entered the DC universe as Aquaman in Batman v Superman 2016 and Aquaman 2018, his physique had become central to the character. The underwater combat scenes demanded muscular endurance, grip strength, and shoulder durability far beyond cosmetic fitness. Momoa trained with old-school intensity, heavy lifts, unconventional movements, climbing, carries, and high-output sessions that built thickness rather than symmetry. What separates Momoa from other Hollywood physiques is intentional imperfection. He has openly resisted extreme cutting and dehydration protocols common in superhero cinema, choosing to maintain mass and strength over razor-sharp aesthetics. That decision placed him closer to traditional bodybuilding culture than modern physique standards, prioritizing density, power, and durability. Jason Momoa didn't become a bodybuilder to look flawless. He adopted bodybuilding discipline to build a body that looked dangerous, capable, and real, even when the cameras stopped rolling. Michael B. Jordan's transformation sits at the intersection of combat realism and bodybuilding hypertrophy. Unlike superhero roles that prioritize size alone, the Creed franchise demanded a body that looked powerful and functional, a physique capable of explosive movement, sustained endurance, and visual dominance under unforgiving close-ups. The shift began with Creed, 2015. Jordan wasn't asked to simply look fit. He had to look like a legitimate professional boxer while still carrying cinematic mass. To achieve that, his training blended high-volume hypertrophy with boxing-specific conditioning. Heavy compound lifts built a dense chest, shoulders, and back, while isolation work refined arms and delts for visual impact. On top of that came brutal boxing sessions, pads, sparring, road work, layered daily. By Creed 2, 2018, the expectations escalated. The body had to be bigger, leaner, and sharper, while still moving like a fighter. This required repeated bulk and cut cycles similar to bodybuilding prep, followed by aggressive conditioning phases that stripped body fat without sacrificing muscle fullness. Recovery became a constant battle, as boxing and hypertrophy compete for the same physical resources. The peak arrived with Creed 3, 2023, where Jordan not only starred but directed. The physique now carried narrative weight. Adonis Creed had to look intimidating before throwing a punch. Jordan pushed size and density further, maintaining thick arms, capped shoulders, and a wide upper back while still performing high-output fight choreography. What makes Jordan essential to this topic is sustainability under dual demands. Bodybuilding alone is taxing. Boxing alone is punishing. Combining both at a cinematic level places extreme stress on joints, connective tissue, and recovery systems. Michael B. Jordan didn't chase bodybuilding for aesthetics alone. He embraced it to build a body that could sell violence, dominance, and legitimacy, frame by frame. Gerard Butler's transformation for 300, 2006, marked one of the most influential and misunderstood moments in Hollywood fitness history. Before 300, Butler was not known for an imposing physique. He was athletic, but unremarkable by action movie standards. That changed when the role of King Leonidas demanded a body that looked looked mythic, battle-hardened, and brutally conditioned. To achieve that look, Butler underwent an extreme regimen that blended bodybuilding-style hypertrophy with punishing conditioning circuits. The goal was not size alone, but a hard, carved appearance under harsh lighting and slow-motion combat scenes. His training emphasized high-volume resistance work, metabolic circuits, and relentless calorie control to drive body fat to dangerously low levels. This approach resembled contest prep more than traditional actor training. What made 300 different was its visual legacy. Butler's shredded, dry physique became a cultural benchmark almost overnight. Gyms across the world saw a surge in 300-style workouts, many of which ignored recovery, progression, or long-term health. Hollywood followed suit. Studios began expecting similar levels of conditioning from actors, regardless of age, genetics, or sustainability. The cost was immediate. Butler later admitted that maintaining the 300 look was exhausting and unhealthy, describing it as unsustainable beyond short filming windows. Dehydration, hormonal stress, and chronic fatigue were part of the process, realities often hidden behind the spectacle. Despite this, the damage was done culturally. 300 reset expectations. Actors were no longer just required to look strong. They were expected to look stage-ready lean, even when portraying warriors rather than bodybuilders. Gerard Butler didn't just transform for a role. He unknowingly helped create a Hollywood standard that pushed actors closer to bodybuilding extremes than ever before. Hollywood sells transformation as success, but behind every extreme physique is pressure, sacrifice, and a cost most audiences never see. In our next video, we go even deeper, exposing what happens after the cameras stop rolling, when these bodies are forced to carry the damage long-term. If this story made you see Hollywood muscle differently, make sure to subscribe, because the next chapter is where the real consequences begin.